Suspected spa leak. I just had my pool and spa completed and noticed on the far side behind my pool the ground was damp. The more soggy the farther you went toward the back fence. It gets much worse with about 35 feet in distance from the back of the fence. I noticed that the spa level was down, but not in a scientific way. I just visually noticed this. My builder said that the spa drains into the pool and it would lower the level. When I turned my sprinkler backflow off for a week, it's still a soggy mess to prove it wasn't a sprinkler leak. I did the bucket test. The pool remained normal, but the spa dropped 6 inches. But was the same level on the inside of the bucket. The builder said he would perform a spa pressure test. He would do it himself, which I don't like because it's his people and they could tell him whatever he wants to hear. Questions: what is a pressure test? Will it reveal a leak? Am I correct to assume there is a leak? Are there any other ways besides the above if he comes back and says the pressure test is fine?
Okay, there's a lot of different parts to that answer, and I'm going to try to keep them all straight in my head. First off, just because the spa drains down, it does not mean that you're losing water. It could be that it is in fact draining back into the pool, which your builder made that reference. And understand, if you take 6 inches of water out of your little spa and add that 6 inches to your big pool, you will not visually be able to see the difference. So while it appeared to go down and the water is gone, it could very easily have pushed back through the plumbing into the pool, and that amount of water is not going to be nearly enough. Again, I'm making some assumptions that the spa is above pool level. If they're in fact the same level, then yes, the spa is losing water. Secondly, what is a pressure test? So the idea behind a pressure test is to cap off both ends of the pipe. So each of your returns and everything there, all of your air lines and however it was plumbed together, and the other end at the equipment, and energize it. Put air pressure on it with a gauge. Get the air pressure up to a certain point, 15, 20, 25 pounds of pressure, and see what happens. If there's a leak in the line, the pressure will go down. If it's not leaking, the pressure will stay the same. What happens though, oftentimes, is at each of the fittings where you're trying to plug each of the jets and you're plugging all those things, you may get a slight amount of air leak. So if that gauge goes down just a teeny tiny bit over a period of time, it's probably fine. What you're going to want to watch for is if and when they pressurize it, how quickly that air gauge goes back down, the pressure gauge, because built right into whatever they're using to pressure test will be a pressure gauge. The ideal situation would be to cap off both ends, put pressure on it with a pressure gauge, and leave it for a day and see what happens. But usually you can tell pretty quickly within a matter of minutes whether or not the plumbing is losing water. So hopefully that would help. If there's a crack in the line somewhere, what happens is the additional pressure that you're putting air on the line will start forcing the water out of the line, and then also the air will start leaking, and that's why the pressure goes down. Again, there's plenty of possible reasons. Again, I don't know the layout as to why you would be soggy there versus somewhere else. Are we a clay environment? Is it a sand environment? Are we looking at a lot of elevation change? There's a lot of different things that might be an indicator. We've also seen, not getting away from whether or not the pool is leaking or not, but also things to think about is there's all kinds of things that can happen in the ground. When you excavate and you build a pool, you now reroute groundwater. You now move things. If there's enough of an elevation change in the project, you could have very well just changed the natural flow of water, that now it's not traveling and staying underground, but it's coming out at a lower section. It's possible. Can't say yes or no on that. I don't know the particular scenario. There's also artesian wells. I know in the area where we live here, we always run the risk of, a quick story actually. I was a child. I grew up in Farmington Hills, Michigan. Born and raised in Detroit, grew up in Farmington Hills. And we had a driveway that went down our front yard, and it was a super steep hill, but it was always muddy, and it would never dry out. And what happened was, across the street, it was a dirt road, and across the street it was always muddy there, and the neighbor complained that our septic field was leaking into his yard. Well, as it turns out, my mom and dad, I'm a young kid, 10 years old, don't understand the world, but they had the builder come out, and he dug a big hole right in the middle of our driveway going down that hill. And he said, by tomorrow morning, this hill will be full of water. And sure enough, by the next morning, that hole was full of water. We're talking, it's on a hill, it drops another 15 feet down, and yet that hole was full of water. And what he explained was, it was an artesian well. It was a natural spring underground that was feeding water, and the ground squeezing, pushing water pressure up, was squeezing water and filled that in. So it was a pretty clear indication that to the neighbor, look, that water on that hill was not coming from our septic field, but in fact it was coming from the ground, leaching up from the ground, because the way that the groundwater swept through the soil, it just popped up in that spot. Again, not saying it's that, but there's always that possibility. Not only that, is this a new subdivision? Are there a lot of homes being built? Is there a lot of disruption? Another thing that we've seen is when homes are being developed and subdivisions are being developed, we're really recoursing and changing the flow of water underground, because you're digging all of these holes and all these places that water would normally just percolate through. And as you build, you're putting blocks in, and you're forcing that underground water to move in different directions. And oftentimes it might show up there as well as a wet spot in your backyard. Not saying that's what it is, but I'm saying that certainly is a possibility as well. I think the biggest thing would be try to figure out how much water, in terms of gallons of water, that you're losing per day, per week, per month, and get a general sense of, does this make sense? If it's a spillover spa, again, I don't know the specifics, but if it's a spillover spa and you're running it in spillover mode, as that water falls from above to below, it's susceptible to losing water based on wind, based on all kinds of things as well. So, I don't know if I helped you at all or just confused you all the more, but there's a lot more to be thought through in terms of what it could actually be. So hopefully I helped you at least a little bit.